will get started now. And if we have more people trickling in, that's excellent. Margaret, did you have anything that you wanted to say before we get going?
Yes, I'll go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon and welcome to the Office of Economic Development Business Webinar. My name is Margaret McGee, the Business Services Manager. Business services assist entrepreneurs and business owners in starting and growing their business. We help in navigating through the different departments within city government to obtain permits and licenses. We also connect the business community with organizations that could provide technical assistance, incentives, resources, and other programs beneficial in operating a business. One way we do this is to host business sessions and webinars. These sessions and webinars are held throughout the year, and the topics are gathered from information we collect from the business community. This is the first of the Shine Online Digital Marketing Webinar Series. Today we have Ms. Wendy Dolan. Wendy has helped hundreds of small businesses build effective websites and spread their message throughout digital marketing. She started her career producing advertising campaigns for international brands such as Nike and Danone. In 2013, she founded Get Online NOLA, an agency devoted to helping small businesses make the most of the internet. Wendy is passionate about supporting women in the workplace. She was a founding member of the American Business Women's Association chapter in New Orleans. She served as president of NOLA Women in Technology, was named a Woman of the Year in Tech in 2016, and was included in Silicon Bayou's 100 Top People in Tech and Entrepreneurship in Louisiana for 5 years. She will share her information about her organization and refining your brand. To keep down distractions, I ask that attendees turn your videos off and mute yourself. I ask that you please place your questions in the chat box and Wendy will answer them accordingly. All handouts provided to me within 24 to 48 hours will be shared with everyone that's present today. Now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Wendy.
Thanks, Margaret. That's great. Thank you for that. And thank you for organizing this. It's so great that the city can put this on for free for all the local business owners and entrepreneurs. So thank you. And welcome, everybody. I see we have a few more people joining us, which is great. Welcome to the first class in our digital marketing series, Shine Online. First, I just want to acknowledge, thank you all for being here. I know it's really stressful with Francine in the Gulf, so thanks for being here and showing up. And we will get started. So first off, I just want to introduce you to a few of our team members who are here today. We have Alex, and Alex is our Director of Digital Solutions and Client Engagement. Alex will be your presenter for next week's session. So you'll all hopefully get to meet him next week. Then we have Allison. Allison's our marketing manager. She is hosting our third session. She's got her camera on there to say hello, so you all will recognize her in a few weeks' time. And finally, we have Lydia. And Lydia is our business development representative, and she is our most recent team member. So we're all really excited to welcome Lydia as well. And all three of us will be available for you guys for personalized strategy sessions after the webinar. So we just wanted to make sure you saw everyone's faces and were familiar with us. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So a few more, Margaret gave a really nice introduction, but I'll just tell you a little bit more about myself. I am a Cajun through and through from Houma. This is a picture of me dressed as a crawfish cooking a gumbo. So I'm not sure if it could get more Cajun than that. I studied graphic design at UL in Lafayette, and then I got my degree in fine art and art history at the University of London. And then, like Margaret said, I worked for some big Los Angeles marketing agencies before I founded Get Online NOLA. So I've been doing this for quite a long time now. And we're really proud at Get Online NOLA that our mission is to help small businesses take control of their online presence and grow their bottom line through effective marketing and web services. We're also really passionate about community involvement, and we make sure that we're involved in the community through events like this one, free webinars and workshops, and also through our annual Get Online NOLA grant, where we give away a website to a deserving small business. And this year we expanded our grant, and we also gave away a marketing audit. So look out for news about that in the spring if you or anyone you know needs a new website, or obviously you could talk to us about it sooner. So a few housekeeping things. Margaret already mentioned some of them. This session is going to be about 90 minutes long. We'll take a 5-minute break halfway through. Please do keep yourself on mute, and we will have a section for questions after each section. So you can type questions into the chat. And there are a couple times where I'll ask for interactions. In those cases, I'll ask you to type something into the chat, to hold on to it while everyone thinks, and then to send them all at once. So we give everybody an opportunity to contribute. So just a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. First, we're going to talk about what is a brand. Then we're going to talk about brand personalities. We'll talk about logos and taglines. And then we'll talk about brand guidelines. And finally, we'll wrap up with customer personas. Those customer personas are going to be really important for leading into next week's workshop as well. So we'll get started with what is a brand. In a nutshell, a brand is what other people think or say about your business. And it's our job as marketers and business owners to try to influence what other people think as much as possible. So what do people remember about your brand? Well, that's really important. The brand is the personality, the values, and the promise that a company makes to its customers. And like I said, we can control what people, or we can attempt to control with good marketing what people remember about us. So a recent study on Forbes said that successful, consistent branding can increase your revenue by up to 23%, which I'm sure we would all like to see on our bottom lines. And how do we do that? Well, most importantly, we want to give our brand human traits. These human traits that we assign to our brand are called a brand persona. And we know that people like to buy products and work with companies that reflect themselves. So when you're thinking about a brand personality, think about your ideal customers and how they see themselves. And hopefully that lines up with how you see your business as well. And we'll talk more about that when we cover customer personas later. But let's get started talking about why it's important to have brand personalities. So first off, it's about relatability. So when customers can relate to your brand, they're more likely to feel an emotional connection to your brand. And if they do that, then they can see that their brand reflects themselves, and it makes them more loyal over a long period of time. So I think about big car brands when I think about this. So for example, like someone who's really outdoorsy, maybe a little granola, they might want to buy a Subaru. Whereas someone who sees themselves as like upper class or sophisticated and wants to project that image, they might buy a BMW. And we know that a lot of people will buy the same cars over and over again. Why? Because they see their car as a reflection of their own personality. So that's a good example of why brand personality is relatable. Secondly, we want to talk about consistency in messaging. So if you have a really well-defined brand, it allows you to maintain consistency across all of your communication. And that doesn't just include your website and maybe your brochures, your social media, your email marketing, but it also can pertain to things like your customer service and the way you talk to your customers on the phone or via email. So consistency in messaging means that people feel comfortable and it helps to build trust. So with trust building, we know that when customers know what to expect from you, they find it easier to trust you with their money. It's as simple as that. If a customer doesn't trust you, they're not going to buy from you. And if you have a persona that someone can relate to, they're much more likely to trust you. Finally, memorability. A consistent brand isn't just recognized, it's remembered. And it makes it easier for customers to choose you over their competitors if they know that they've seen you before, they remember you, they trust you. So these are all reasons that we want to give our brand human traits. So just as an example of a kind of a brand with multiple personalities, first we see these two slides here, these two pictures that maybe were social media posts. So this is a fictitious brand called Martin Financial. It's a financial planning firm, and we'll talk about them a little later on as well. But if you saw these two posts, if you were at all vaguely familiar with this brand, you would think, oh, I know who that is. That's Martin Financials. I recognize the logo. I recognize the color, the fonts. So subconsciously, even if you're just scrolling past, you would know that you were engaging with Martin Financial. However, if you saw this last post, even though it's got Martin Financial's logo up at the top, the colors are all wrong. The fonts are wrong. So if you were just scrolling through Instagram or Facebook and you saw this post, you wouldn't immediately associate it with Martin Financial. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to be consistent with our branding and our messaging. And this is really why. So most studies say that the average adult's attention span online is 8.5 seconds. Now, I think that's particularly generous, especially when we consider social media and how mindlessly we can all scroll through that at times. But the point is that if people are skimming your content, you have a really short amount of time for them to recognize you and to associate your brand with the content that they see. I'm going to leave this here for a second because look, you do not have much time to reach people, and it's so important that you're consistent in order to do so. So how do we do that? Well, a brand framework is one of the ways that we organize our brand persona and our brand personality. So there's a famous theoretical framework developed by a Stanford researcher named Jennifer Aaker, and she's grouped brands into 5 distinct categories. They are competence, sincerity, excitement, sophistication, and ruggedness. And all of these categories have brand adjectives that fall beneath them to further describe the brand. So take a look at the list and think about, is there a framework that jumps out at you as being related to your brand? Is there one that you specifically connect with? Now let's talk about some examples of these different these different frameworks. So when we think of competence, we often think of like financial institutions or tech companies that have been around a really long time, like for example, Intel. When we think of sincerity, we think of wholesome, family-orientated, down-to-earth, honest brands, like for example, maybe Disney. Although when we think of Disney, we could also associate it with excitement because we think about maybe their theme parks or some of their more exciting movies. So not all brands just fall into one of these frameworks. This is a really easy one. If we think of Red Bull and all their advertising, Red Bull has wings. They're literally selling you an energy drink. So they fall under the excitement framework. When we think about sophistication, almost all luxury brands are going to fall into this framework. So like Chanel, Dior, Tiffany's, brands like that, BMW, they're all going to fall into the sophistication framework. And then ruggedness, I mentioned Subaru earlier, things like REI. Oops, sorry, I've gone way ahead. Things like REI, Jeep, companies like that would fall into this ruggedness framework. So like I said, you don't have to just choose one framework. Most brands don't fall into one framework. For Get Online NOLA, we consider ourselves having 3 different categories: competence, sincerity, and excitement. So obviously with our brand, we have expertise in web design and digital marketing, which falls under competence. It's really important that we are thought leaders in our industry and we know what's happening and we know how to produce good products. But it's also important for us to be sincere because, like I said before, we want to talk to our customers in a human way. We don't want to use jargon. We want to be accessible and flexible to them. And finally, because we are a bit playful, we're creatives after all, we also think of ourselves as an exciting brand. So I would say that 3 is the max when you're thinking of brand frameworks. You don't want to try to be all things for all people. If you do, you risk feeling inauthentic. It's just not possible. So here is a list of brand adjectives. I know it's overwhelming. You should have gotten this if you registered before today for this webinar. You should have gotten this list with brand frameworks and adjectives on it. I want to take a minute to, I'll come back to it, but I wanted to take a minute to look at this list, everybody who's here. Let's see how many people we have here at the minute. 27 people, that's great. So I'll put the list back up on the screen. If everybody can just take a minute to type 2 or 3 brand adjectives into the chat and hold on to them until I say send. And thanks for your comment, Mallory. If you didn't get the brand adjectives, we'll make sure they get to you after this, but I'll put them back onto the screen and I'll give everybody just another 30 seconds or so to choose some adjectives that they think describe their brand. They don't necessarily have to be on this list. And then let's send them through, you guys. Is anybody going to give me any adjectives that describe their brand? Yay, thanks, Chantel. Trustworthy, detailed, inspiring. So Chantel, with your adjectives there, what framework do you think you fall under? You can either turn your microphone on or you can type, either way.
The framework would be competency for me, competency and sincerity. I want to say excitement, but definitely competency and sincerity.
Yeah, and that makes sense because you said you're a business consultant, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. Let's see, I'll scroll through and pick. Does anybody else want to share why they chose the adjectives that they chose? Thank you all for being so participating. I really appreciate it. Let's see. Oh, this is an interesting one, romantic. Kristen, do you want to share why you are charming, romantic, and sophisticated?
I have a restaurant.
Nice. Okay. What's your restaurant?
It's Annunciation in the Warehouse District.
Fantastic. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. And what framework do you think that you fall into with those adjectives?
Excitement, sophistication, and maybe a little sincerity.
Okay, nice. I like that. Anybody else want to share their? Thank you, Mallory. Mallory says, I chose those adjectives because my product line is going to be built to help people during storms. Let's go back and look at Mallory. Mallory, you are, it is your time right now, isn't it? Hopefully your products can help people in the next storm. So informative and impactful. Very good. Let's see. Professional, trustworthy, and reliable from Michelle for your youth organization and your rental business. Does anybody else want to share why they chose the adjectives that they chose? Or is anybody struggling to choose adjectives or frameworks that they fit into? I'll go back to those frameworks for you. All right. Well, thank you for participating. That's great. So your first little bit of homework for after this session, obviously optional, is to identify your brand personality and to create a list of supporting adjectives for your brand. We'll talk a little later about your brand guidelines, and this is something that is in our brand guidelines. So what are our values? What is our framework, and what adjectives do we use to describe ourselves? So that is your homework. Excellent. Alexandra, we have one more coming in. So Alexandra says, I chose these adjectives because we care about our people and clients. We inspire our candidates to grow, and we organize with our clients and candidates to ensure they are onboarded smoothly and placed in the best position for their skill set. So I imagine that you are a staffing company. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
That's great. All right. And let's see, what adjectives did you choose? Inspiring, caring, and organized. That's a good one for sure for a staffing company. Excellent. So I've outlined the homework for this little mini section. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? Feel free to turn your microphones on if you have a question. Has everyone heard of this concept of brand personality prior to this, or has anybody been thinking about their brand personality already?
I've heard of brand personality. I never really thought about it a lot, but I have heard personality be thrown around a lot lately for this year.
Okay, nice. So yeah, like I said, it's one of the first things that we identify when we work with clients. And it's funny because a lot of times business owners already, like, you know this about your brand. But when you start growing and you start hiring new employees, or you start hiring a marketing company, or you start reaching out and putting ads in magazines and they're doing art for you, they don't know this unless you've got it on paper. So that's why it's so important to identify this from the beginning so that there's consistency as you grow. So next we're going to talk about logos. So there's some basic rules when designing a logo. I'll just zip through them first and then we'll talk about them in more detail. First of all, consider your personality. So, if you are a very traditional brand, then you're not going to want a super modern logo, and vice versa. Next, make it memorable. We see so many generic logos that, we just lose track. So it's got to be memorable. It's important not to just choose some like generic stock image for your mark, but I always recommend using some kind of image or mark to go with your logo, something that can stand alone without your name and hopefully is memorable enough that it can stand alone. So like that little Martin Financial M that we saw earlier in the examples would be a mark. Or for Get Online NOLA, this Riverbend icon that we pull from the O, that's our mark. Next, we want to keep it simple and legible. Overly crowded logos are kind of a sign of unorganized businesses. Next, we want to make it scalable. So right now, your logo might only be on your menu or on your business card, but one day, do you want your logo to be on a billboard? It's got to be scalable and it's got to be legible at that size. Or do you maybe want to scale your logo down and put it on a pin that you hand out at a conference? So your logo needs to be, from the tiniest little mark all the way up to billboard size. One little tip about that is when you're having a logo designed, you want to make sure it's a vector file. So that's usually like a .eps file or an Illustrator file. And if it's a vector image, then you know it can be scaled up or down to whatever size you need. Next, you want to make sure that it's possible that it can make a single color version. So it's okay for your logo to have a lot of colors in it, but if you can't make it single color, then when you go to print a t-shirt or a cap or a water bottle, you're going to find it really difficult and or really expensive to print that logo effectively. Oops. And the last one I skipped past was make it modern but timeless. So you want to make sure that your logo isn't like very much 2024. So in 3 years, people are going to go, "Ooh, that looks a bit dated." So now we're going to look at some examples. So Smuckers, the famous jam company, they rebranded in 2020. And they obviously they wanted to modernize their brand, but I think that in doing so, they strayed so far away from their brand personality of sincerity and competence. The brand is 130 years old, and there's a lot of value in that. But their new logo doesn't pay any note, any homage to that history. So here's an example of a company kind of losing sight of their own brand personality in a rebrand. If anybody disagrees with me, let me know in the comments. Thanks, you agree. I personally, I think it's a pretty logo, but it's just so far away from their personality that it makes it hard to see the continuity there. Next, we want to talk about memorable logos. So we've all seen 100 of these. Little bits of clip art or stock art from maybe from Fiverr or Canva. And it's really hard for your brand to be memorable with a generic logo. So I understand the desire to just get a logo so you can get your business running, but choosing a stock logo is actually going to cost you money in the long run. It can't be trademarked. You can't hold the copyright on that logo. And your brand's just kind of going to melt into the rest. So you can't distinguish yourself from your competitors by using a logo from a stock site. Simplicity and scalability. So look at these two logos. I mean, if you can bear to look at these two logos, they are so busy and there's so much happening here. So this Midtown Attorneys logo is, the font is really busy. Trying to transfer this into a one color would be really, really difficult with all these gradients and things like that. Then we have the tree doctor. Now the tree doctor is trying to do too many things. They've got a tree icon here, which is a clip art. They've got a flower here. And then they've also got this little medical signal. So this is the opposite of simple, and it's also really not very scalable. Let's look at legibility. So Kia rebranded a few years ago, Kia, the car company. And I personally really like their new logo. I think it's really pretty. However, legibility was a huge problem for Kia. In fact, when they launched their new brand, Google searches for the term K in cars quadrupled within like the first few days of this brand launching, because cars are driving around and people are like, what's this K in? I don't understand. I don't know what this car company is. So whereas their brand is really nice and they did a good job modernizing it, they've lost all legibility within the brand. Has anyone seen this? And did anyone have this thought when they first saw this Kia logo? Anyone think, oh, what is this new car company?
I thought it said Kiev.
You thought that, yeah, it's really hard to know, isn't it? Did you notice it on the roads?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. So moving forward, so we talked about modern but timeless. Now, both of these brands, I'm sure you've maybe encountered them once or twice. But these are examples of like really subtle modernizations of a brand. So I'm sure everyone noticed Google's update, it's probably about a decade now, where they removed the serifs from their logo and they just modernized their font. Still timeless, still Google, but just more modern. And then Starbucks as well, they dropped the lettering from their logo. And one of the main considerations for that, according to like design blogs and things like that, was that the word coffee wasn't identifiable in all the different countries where they have a presence. So they decided to drop that. At that point, their mark alone was recognizable enough for them to move forward without their actual name. Interesting. All right, so we're going to move on to taglines. I'll ask you in a minute if you have a tagline, but first we'll just talk a little bit about what it is. So a tagline is a short, powerful phrase that is permanently associated with your business. Importantly, a tagline is not a slogan. It is a permanent phrase associated with your business. And once you have your brand framework, you can better identify your tagline and your logo and things like that. Your tagline represents the tone and the feeling you want for your business. And a good tagline is going to illustrate both your brand and the benefits that you're promising. So our tagline is, "We make you shine online." So it's not a list of services. It's more of an idea of who we are and who we want people, how we want people to think of us. You'll notice here on this slide, this is our website homepage. We've got our tagline up here at the top. It doesn't say that we do marketing and web design for small businesses. We've held that for a little bit further down the page. This just is supposed to give you an initial indication of who we are. You know, we're for you. We want to make you shine online. It's not about us, it's about how we can help you. So let's do a quick little guessing game. Can anybody tell me the tagline for Nike in the comments? Or you can turn your mic on. There you go. Everybody knows it. It's "Just do it." Thanks, Michelle. How about Ford? Thanks, Carla. Good to see you guys are here. Ford Tough, that's true. Actually, I think Ford Tough is more of a slogan. Or maybe I'm wrong. I thought their tagline was "Built to Last." But either way, we're going with that kind of rugged competence framework here. I'll have to double check that. I cut ahead of you guys for Apple. Think different. Anybody know Subway? There you go, eat fresh. We all hear the commercial in our heads. And how about L'Oreal? Does anybody remember that one? It's kind of the hardest one, I think.
You're worth it.
Well done. Who was that? Well, thank you, whoever that was. Yeah, so this gives you an idea of how important and how memorable taglines can be if they're successful, right? We all know these taglines, and they've been reiterated over and over in these brands' messaging for a really long time. I want to point out that grammar isn't always important with taglines or with messaging for that matter. So like think different, that's not correct, right? It should be think differently, but that doesn't have the same ring to it. So it's not always important to make sure you get the grammar right as long as you get the sentiment right in a tagline. So once we have our tagline and our brand personality, we can use that to guide all of our marketing. So these are a few promotional items, like free merch and gifts that we've handed out over the years, and they are very representative of our 3 brand frameworks. The multi-charging tool is helpful and accessible, and it's a kind of a representation of our competence. The water bottles are safe and reliable, and the temporary tattoos are playful and fun. We gave those out at Bayou Boogaloo one year. But as you can see, each one has our logo very clearly, and they're all using our logo in a different way, but the branding is consistent across all 3 items, and they all speak to our brand framework. All right, so your turn. So in the chat, just type and hold until I say send. I want you to tell me about how you feel about your logo and tagline. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you think it needs work, or do you not have one yet? You're just at the beginning. So give everybody about, I don't know, 15 seconds or so, and then we'll all share them at the same time. All right, send those over, please. needs work. Thanks, Lee. The bank that cares about you. Is that your tagline? Love it, love it, love it. Oh, that's great. We've got a lot of love it. Let's make it happen. Needs some work from Michelle. I love ours. Come experience the difference and reading with purpose. Lakeisha, we'll have to hear from you about what your business is. Love it. I like my logo. Don't have an official tagline, but think I probably need to develop one. I agree, Kristen, and that is for enunciation, I think you said. Like it, not love it from Mallory. Would anyone like to, I know Margaret asked you guys to be prepared to share your logo. Would anybody like to either share their logo or tell me why they love it or think it needs work? No pressure, we don't have to. But if it's something that you want to talk about privately, we're definitely available for that later on. I'm curious,
Yeah,
Ahmad.
Wendy.
Oh yeah, hi
Oh.
Lee.
Yeah, on mine, I guess it's more my logo end. I think it's about 12 years old, and we've modified it a few times for, work apparel and different things. But I think last time I met with y'all on our website, we looked at it. We said it still had a little life in it, but do you find that maybe there's I guess, a lifespan for logos, or I know some can be timeless, but what's your take on that?
That's
I
a
guess
really good.
I'd say I don't like mine. I said mine needs work just because I guess I'm tired of seeing the same one. So I'm just, maybe I'm thinking I need a new one or an altered one, but maybe it's fine for years to come. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Like, is a logo forever? And I think no, not necessarily. Like with those examples of these super like world famous brands like Google and Starbucks, they do shift and change. Doesn't mean you have to have a complete rebrand, but modifying a logo, I think is a good thing to do over time. Or sometimes it is good to rebrand altogether. We Let me see. I'm looking at okay, so we've got Delta personnel. Let me see. Can everybody see this in the chat? I'm not sure if you can see this when I go through. And we've got Colmex Construction. Thank y'all for sharing those. Does anybody want to talk about what they like or don't like about these two logos, Alexandra or Carla?
I'll go first.
Thank you.
So for our Delta logo, it is still up to date. It's been in the business for a while, since 1968 pretty much. But we've changed it a few times because it used to be called Lawrence Staffing, and it would range, but we settled on Delta Personnel to focus more on the factor that we were by the river and a lot of in New Orleans kind of thing, because it's mainly our how we build our brand off of it, especially with our core values are built upon the triangle. But
Okay.
it's not my favorite design. I've been trying to introduce new ideas to it, but it's just a back and forth conversation. But everyone recognizes our triangle design.
Yeah, I get that. And it does feel of a time, right? Like the font, I think in particular feels like of maybe kind of late 80s kind of time frame. Is that about the time it was made?
You are right on the dot.
Yeah. So I think there's a way to update that. It's interesting that you said you're right on the river, on the Delta, because that isn't showing through to me. And I wonder if that's important or it's not, like really digging into your brand personality and discovering if that's important would be important to do before rebranding. But I can see how it could evolve for sure. Thanks for sharing that, Alexandra.
Thank you.
Next, we have Carla from Colmex. Carla, how do you feel about the Colmex logo?
I love our logo because I think that is simple. It's our name basically, and It's just like I said, it's simple and doesn't have like a lot of colors. We changed it recently. This is the last one that we have. And it's keeping our colors. That is like the like navy blue. And I think I really like it.
I like the way that like it looks recognizable, and I like the way that there's obviously some thought going into the X and the way it works with the circle. Do you
Correct.
ever struggle not having a mark that you can use separately, like with the aspect ratio being so rectangular? Is that ever a concern?
No, actually, the old logo that we have, it had like the same circle around and with the X that complete that circle. And we used to have like a little roof that it was on the top of the O, but we removed it because in that moment we are used more like residential projects. Now we are taking more residential and so we're keeping with the residential, but we get more like commercial projects. So if we keep just like the roof, it's like involved just more like residential. So we take it off and that is like we change it
Yeah.
because our brand is like changing, our work is changing.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Well, thank y'all for sharing. I think in the interest of, and I really appreciate Lakeisha from the Who Dat Cares Foundation and Checkmate for sharing, and also Who Dat Barbershop, lots of businesses going on. So thank you all for sharing. I think in the interest of time, we will move on. But thank you for that. So, a little bit of homework again, optional, but really useful before the next webinar. If you could come up with 1 or 2 draft taglines, if you don't have one already, and think about messaging that reflects your brand personality. Obviously, if you don't have a logo yet, then it's definitely time to start thinking about that too. Any questions before we move on? We're going to move on to brand guidelines next. All right, so brand guidelines. So we'll talk about brand guidelines, then we'll take a little break, and then we'll come back to customer personas just to give you guys an idea of where we are. So your brand guidelines, or sometimes called a brand book, is a cheat sheet, and it helps make sure you're always consistent in how you're presenting your brand. We're going to look at the brand guidelines for Get Online NOLA as an example, and then get you started on your own brand guidelines. So the bare minimum that your brand guidelines should contain is your logo and tagline, which we've already spoken about, your brand colors, your brand fonts or typography, some styles like icons and photos, things like that, your mission and vision, and then your tone of voice, which comes back to your brand framework that we talked about before. We have a brand guidelines template for you all. I'll send that to you through Margaret. And it's just a Canva template. So you can take that and just replace our information with yours. Trust me, it's so helpful, especially when you have a new hire or, like I said, you're working with someone else to produce any kind of marketing for you. So first we'll talk about color. So color psychology is incredibly important when thinking about your brand. Like the example you saw earlier from Martin Financial, you have to be consistent with color because up to 90% of a consumer's initial judgment of a product is based on color. Even if we don't realize it, it has a major impact on our thought processes. Here's a kind of rough overview of color psychology. So we always think about color theory when we're working on a brand. We think about our gut reaction, our subconscious reactions to the different colors. And choosing the right colors helps us guide what people might think about the brand. So for example, there is a reason why so many fast food restaurants use red and yellow colors. They make us think of fun, fast, desirable. Red is bold and impulsive. It's all about desire and taking action. And we know that a lot of these foods that we buy from brands like this are impulse buys. And then yellow is a symbol of happiness and energy and fun. So all things that these companies want you to associate with their brands. On the other hand, you'll often see blues and grays used for banks, financial institutions, tech companies. So blues often symbolize like wisdom, peace, trust, stability. And that's why companies like banks, technology companies, and healthcare companies gravitate more towards blues. So you guys will have these slides. So if you don't have brand colors established yet, you may want to look at that color theory chart to kind of think about what colors will work best with your brand. So these are Get Online NOLA's brand colors. As you've probably noticed through this presentation so far, we use greens and blues, again, to emphasize our brand framework. It all comes back to the same thing. The blues for trust and confidence, the green for a kind of more playful and fun tone. Let's talk about typography. So this is one of those things that actually really gets on my nerves when I see this on social media, particularly, is like a brand using a different font every time they're posting. And it just feels disjointed to me. So I would say, generally speaking, we want to pick 2 fonts, maybe 3 at the most when we're looking at our brand guidelines. Fonts can be tricky because there are so many of them. But like I said, 2 at the most. So let's talk about the different aspects, the different types of fonts. So the first one you see here is a serif. A serif font has this little line to cap the letters. And generally those are thought about as being more traditional, more serious, more kind of on the competence and reliability side. Then we have a sans serif. And if you notice, a sans serif is missing the little line on the end of the letters. They are usually considered more modern and streamlined. And nowadays they're considered easier to read as well, particularly digitally. I think people used to always gravitate towards serifs for printed materials, like actual novels and books, but sans serif is considered much more easy to read on a screen. Then we have scripts, which are like, or handwriting fonts, and they often can feel like young or playful, or sometimes more elegant if you think about like a wedding venue or something like that, that may use a script. Really depends on the font with a script. But you do risk lacking legibility if you choose a script in your brand. And then finally, we have display fonts. These are just for fun. They're used to get your attention or for like a specific purpose. Like obviously haunted houses are coming up, and we'll see fonts like this one for those kinds of brands. So when you look at our brand guidelines, you'll see we have 2 fonts that we use. Our kind of clean, modern font, Montserrat, and then we use Monoton very sparingly just for emphasis throughout the site, and that kind of aligns with the shine theme that we have going on. So if we look at some examples of really famous brands and their logos, we have Time, Vogue, and Tiffany & Co. all using a serif font. They're older, more reliable publications like Time. Vogue, you have them as being like authoritative and sophisticated. And then of course, Tiffany's is a luxury brand, and they're like, you know, emphasizing their continuity and their brand age. Then we look at all these tech companies with sans serif brands, sans serif fonts. So they're emphasizing how fresh, modern, innovative they are with these fonts. And you can really tell when you look at the 2, like what kind of vibe they're each trying to go for with their fonts. So definitely worth thinking about when you are designing a logo, but also when you're designing any of your marketing material as well. Next, we'll look at style. So as you can see, we have 4 different icons of rockets here, just as an example. And they're 4 very, very different styles. When you are thinking about your website or your branding materials, your marketing materials, you really need to pick one style. Otherwise, it can look disjointed. So here, the first style is like simple, fun. The second is more illustrative. Maybe it's more childlike or maybe more relaxed. It might indicate that you're like you're a handmade kind of a brand. The third is more realistic and maybe more exciting. And then the fourth is a little bit more simple and straightforward. So like I said, we would never mix these styles. You kind of have to decide on what works for your personality and run with it. So your homework here is to complete the brand guideline template. This is a really simple piece of homework. You just slot in your colors, fonts, personality, tagline, things like that. And then it can grow with time as your brand grows and your brand framework is solidified a little bit more. So I encourage you to take that template and run with it. Does anybody have any questions about brand guidelines or any of the pieces of it that we spoke about in this section? All right, well, it is 2:26. Why don't we take a 5-minute break or a 4-minute break? Let's come back here at 2:30 on the dot, and we'll have half an hour left to cover brand personas. Just shoot me a message in the chat if you have any questions or concerns in the meantime. I'll see you in a few minutes, guys. Hello again, everybody. All right. So we are going to move on to customer personas, which are a really important and fun little exercise in order to understand your audience. So we would actually, usually we would do this step before we create a logo or a tagline or any other marketing materials, because we want our customers, if we want our customers to relate to us, we have to make sure we understand them. So I've given you kind of the more fun and shiny things like logos and taglines first, but this is actually where we would tend to start. So we've talked about being memorable and consistent, and this is incredibly important when we consider the rule of 7. It was developed by the movie studios back in the 1930s, and the idea is that it takes at least 7 interactions before a customer trusts you enough to make a purchase. So for instance, like you might see an ad on Instagram, or someone might see your ad on Instagram, or they might hear someone mention you, or they might read your name in a local newspaper. And like all of those different brand interactions are going to add up to creating trust and building trust. Basically, after someone's interacted with you 7 times, it could be consciously or subconsciously, the idea is that then they will trust you enough to actually make a purchase. But like I said before, if they see your content without knowing it's yours because your brand is all over the place, then you've wasted that engagement. So really important to be consistent. When we talk about brand personas, we talk about the marketing funnel, and we talk about how we speak to different people at the different stages of the funnel. So the top of the funnel is the discovery phase or the awareness phase. And that is where they are just kind of having a basic awareness of you. Then the consideration phase is the middle of the funnel, and the decision purchase phase is the final end of the funnel. So for example, we have an example of a staffing company, actually, funnily enough, that Delta's here. So let's say your business is a staffing company that wants to find new job candidates. Well, you might reach a candidate for the first time with a social post, if you see up here at the top of the funnel, about work-life balance, for example. And that candidate might click on the post and go to your blog where they read and learn about finding a job that works for their lifestyle. In a perfect scenario, there would be a newsletter sign-up form on that page, and they would sign up for your newsletter. And then all of a sudden they're in the bottom of the funnel because they really are like getting to know you and understanding your brand and engaging with your brand, and they'll continue interacting with you. But it's important through these stages of the funnel to understand your audience's motivations. So like I said, the first stage is awareness. That's when they start to identify the problem that they have, that they need you to solve, and they become aware of you. The next stage is consideration. That's when they start actively researching different brands that might solve their problem. And the final stage, decision, they're ready to make a purchase, and you just have to prompt them to do so. In this stage, we might use like specific tactics like excitement or urgency to increase the chance of converting the sale. So back to customer personas. A customer persona is a research-based, idealized version of your target user. So it helps us use your resources as effectively as possible, and it focuses your attention on the perfect client, who they are, what they do, what interests them, what motivates them, what are their goals, what are their frustrations. And then it helps us get the right kind of message to them at the right time. So when we're thinking about an ideal customer, we like to think of it as a real person. So if we were working with you on a customer persona, we would say, tell me about your perfect customer. Like, what is that ideal customer that you love working with? Show us their LinkedIn platform, show us what they do. And then we use that to think about how we can reach more people like them. So we want to think about their age, their family, their career, their income range, what they like and dislike, maybe what their hobbies are, and specifically what media outlets they use. And we can use all of this information to reach them at the right time. Importantly, your messaging in any of these stages is not really about you. It's about them. It's about how your business helps them to achieve their goals or to relieve a frustration. So keep in mind, we're not focusing on your goal. Your goal is to grow your business and to get a new customer. We're focusing on their goal. You have to put yourself in their shoes and see how you communicate that your business can help them. So you should have received a customer persona worksheet. If not, don't worry, we'll send it out again. This is a really useful thing where you can just print out as many of these as you want and jot down all of these pieces of information. And we'll go through each one of these now. We're going to use the same imaginary persona, the same company that we used before, which was Martin Financial. And in this scenario, it's all about storytelling. So Martin Financial is a small accounting firm in New Orleans owned by Jessica Martin. They currently focus on accounting and tax preparation services, but they've recently decided to add financial planning services, and they found the perfect team member. They've been able to bring a few of their financial planning clients from their existing clientele, but they'd like to expand the branch of the business. And to do that, they need more clients. So we'll explore with personas how we can accomplish this. Well, first we need to know who we want to reach. So we have our current customers. They are accounting customers with a wide variety of demographics and income levels. And all the current financial planning customers have come from their current clientele so far. Then we have new target customers. So we have 4 distinct personas that we want to reach here. So Martin Financial would be filling out 4 different customer persona worksheets. You can do 2, you can do 6, you can do 10, but 3 to 4 is usually the sweet spot. So they're looking for younger upper middle class families. They're looking for high income families in general, middle-aged families with a recent financial windfall, and then pre-retirement planners. So let's look at the young upper middle class family persona. So if we were filling out that customer persona document, this is what we would say. So we want someone just like Andrea Williams. We know that Andrea is in her mid-30s. She's female. She's married with 2 small children, age 3 and 5. She lives uptown. Her household income is $120K, and she has a job as a sales manager. Let's dig a little deeper. Andrea uses Instagram every day. She logs on to Facebook most days, Pinterest every now and again, and LinkedIn about once a week. So we know we can use these platforms to reach Andrea. She has a business degree from LSU, and she is from Homa, like me. She reads local newspapers and NOLA.com. She's interested in home decor and DIY, and she's a good customer for Lee. And she's somewhat sensitive to price, but likes small luxuries and would rather save than spend. So Martin Financial's goals, yeah, we know they want this client, and they want to increase income over time by bringing on clients like Andrea. But what are Andrea's goals? She wants to gain guidance on saving for her children's education. She wants to create a plan for retirement savings, and she wants to ensure healthy long-term family finances. But what are her frustrations? What's going to stop her from hiring Martin Financial? This is the important part here, because these are the things we need to address. We've already talked about what her goals are, but let's talk about her frustrations. She's busy. She's got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. Anyone in here with children knows how hard that is. So she doesn't have time to think about long-term financial planning. However, she's worried. She wants to know how in the world she's going to save enough money for her kids' college fund. And she's worried about trusting someone with her money. And she's also worried, like, can I actually afford to save right now? Is that a possibility? So she's got all these mixed goals and frustrations bouncing around in her head. And it's Jessica Martin's job to alleviate those concerns and to provide a service that is going to relieve some of Andrea's frustrations. So how are we going to reach Andrea in these 3 different phases? So in the awareness phase, hopefully Andrea sees some boosted posts, maybe on Instagram or Facebook, over the course of a few months. She recognizes the brand. She's had several interactions. She, after a few posts that she sees, she clicks on one that is a financial calculator for how much money she needs to save for sending her kids to college. She uses the calculator and she has a feeling of being more informed. So the brand has connected with Andrea and given her a feeling of comfort because one of those unknowns has been alleviated. The next stage, consideration. Andrea thinks, okay, now I know how much money I need to save. I need to start making a plan. So she starts visiting several different websites based on friends' recommendations, maybe a Google search. Maybe Martin Financial is running a Google ad that reaches Andrea when she searches for financial planner near me. When she sees that ad come up on Google, she remembers that Martin Financial she remembers them from social media, and she remembers that they gave her that calculator. And this boosts her confidence and trust. Then in the decision phase, she actually goes to Martin Financial's website. She reads some testimonials. She likes what she sees. She also likes that the branding is fresh and modern and kind of feels like it's speaking to her and there's no jargon in the copy. So she fills out a form for a time-saving virtual consultation. Yes, I realize it's not always this easy, but this is what we're aiming for at the different stages of the funnel. So let's look at those same slides that we looked at earlier, those social posts, now with the final slide fixed to match the branding. So here we go. She's worried. She's been thinking about how she's going to send her kids to college. She sees this post and she goes, I can do this. I can use this free calculator. She clicks on it. She uses it. Then maybe a few days later, maybe it's a few weeks later, or even a few months, she sees a client review. Oh, look, there's a really happy person who's used this company. And maybe a little while later, she sees that they're doing a webinar and she signs up for the webinar. And now she is engaging directly with the business. So we would consider her to be in the bottom of the funnel. I ran through that pretty quickly. Does anybody have any questions or want to talk about like trouble that they've had in the different stages of the funnel, creating messaging or reaching clients or reaching potential clients? All right, well, I really encourage you all to do this bit of homework. If you're only going to do one thing, I really recommend it's this, to fill out at least 2 customer persona worksheets. Like I said, you can visualize a customer that you already have. So I'm going to pick on Lee for a second with Mike's Hardware, because we know that he has like 2 very distinct different types of customers, right? So he's a hardware store in Elysian Fields, and he's got like your weekend DIY customers who come in for like random bits of hardware here and there. Maybe they want some tools or some just basic building supplies. That's one customer persona that he can fill out. Then he's got his tradespeople, his plumbers, his construction workers, those people who are coming in on a regular basis. They're a whole different set of messaging. So in Lee's case, we would fill out those 2 different customer personas for him. Can anybody tell me either in the chat or by turning on your microphone, like how many different customer personas you might be looking at filling out and maybe roughly who they are?
I think 4 for us, technically.
Okay.
I
do you
know
wanna
it's
run through them?
2 groups. It's 2 groups for our staffing company. So one would be a clientele-based kind of customer persona. So in other words, small businesses, mid-sized businesses who are understaffed, need assistance with certain events, that kind of stuff. And then the candidates itself, the employees, would be people looking for work, either temporary, full-time, have a specific skill set that they would like to finally be able to use. We try our best to place them and hopefully get them hired by contract.
That's a very clear distinction of 2 different customer personas. Thank you for that. And yeah, I would say you probably would want to like even drill down a little bit further. So we have a few different staffing companies that we work with. And for their customer personas, we might look at, say, a small business owner who knows that they're like in charge of everything, wearing all the hats. And they are going to have different sets of messaging than maybe an HR manager at a company with, say, 100 employees who is much more savvy on HR terminology and hiring terminology. So we need to make sure that we're reaching both of those customers' personas within that same like client category. Does that make sense about like splitting those personas even further?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. Excellent. So we have a few more people in the chat. Chantal is saying maybe 4 to 5, depending on services customers looking for. All right. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. I have several services that my business offers, so I'm going to have different customers. And then at the same time, I can have one customer that is looking for me to set up their business, and then looking for me to write grants for them and apply for government contracting as well. So that one customer can utilize 3 services or maybe 4 services, and then another customer can come in and just say, hey, I want you to apply for grants on behalf of my nonprofit or my business.
Okay, yeah. So really looking at the distinctions between the nonprofit audience versus the small business audience and the different language that they're using within that you're going to use to reach out to those 2 different audiences. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense as well. Excellent. Does anybody else want to share what customer personas they might work on in the next week? Lakeisha says she has 2 distinct different customers. All right.
Hi, this is Lakeisha. For Who Dat Barbershop, we have 2 distinct customers. We typically have the gentlemen and the women. So for the women, our customer is usually the single mom with multiple kids, and that we market to. And then we also have the working male, age 25 to 45, that we market to also.
All right. Yeah, that's great that you can be that specific already about who you're marketing to and knowing how to reach them and maybe what their frustrations are as well. You know, thinking of like the young working mom versus the working male professional. So yeah, that makes sense. So I hope you will fill out those customer personas, Lakeisha. Excellent. Any final questions? Because we are wrapping up. That is the end of our presentation. I'll just reiterate all the homework we gave you. You might have noticed Margaret put the brand frameworks PDF and the customer personas in the chat. So if you don't have those from the email, you can download them from the chat. Thank you for that, Margaret.
You're welcome.
And then if everybody just kind of takes note of, obviously optional, I'm not grading you on any of this, but if you spend a little bit of time over the next week thinking about your brand personality, your brand adjectives, your taglines, your brand guidelines, and your customer persona worksheets, it'll set you up for success for next week's Website That Works webinar. That's a lot of W's. And finally, we would love to hear from you individually. I know some of you were probably too shy to speak up on the chat, but we'd be happy to have a one-on-one with you. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, we'll offer you a free strategy session. And that is available at getonlinenola.com/strategy. Or you can reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat as well. Wendy at getonlinenola.com, super simple. And Amy, you asked, how can I get the adjectives and other template? Amy, if you scroll up in the chat a little bit, you'll see that Margaret uploaded them to the chat. So one of them is called GON-brand frameworks, and the other one is called GON-customer persona. And you should be able to download those straight from the chat. And we will send the brand guidelines as well, the brand guidelines template over email. Thanks, Amy. Glad that helped. All right. Well, I hope to hear from some of you. We'd love to do our strategy session with y'all. They're free. They're 30 minutes. They're no obligation. We can go through anything that is interesting to you, whether it's your brand or your tagline or your website. It may be that you want to wait till after all 3 workshops. But I hope this was really helpful for you. And I want to thank you again for coming. And I want to wish everybody really good luck. Fingers crossed that Francine stays away and calms down. But yeah, we look forward to seeing y'all next week. Unless, Margaret, is there anything that you wanted to finish up with?
Just wanted to kind of end out with saying thank you to everyone that joined us today, especially you for your very informative presentation. Within 5 to 10 business days, this session will be available on the Office of Economic Development YouTube channel, along with previous recorded sessions. Remember to check your email for webinar 2, websites that work. And I hope you guys are able to join us. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And everyone have a great day. Stay safe.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Hang up.